Alright, welcome back, Pokemon fans. We're here with the finals of the Midseason Showdown in Independence, Missouri. So this battle that we're about to have is going to be Leonard Craft versus Tom Vehewald. Both these players are really strong local players who have had a lot of success both locally and at regionals and nationals and whatnot. So this is looking to be a really exciting match, and I'm excited to jump into it. So these two players are connecting. We just saw Leonard in his top 4 match take a really strong victory over Carlos Martos. Leonard was able to really utilize his Trick Room mode to control the game and get the KOs that he needed to get. Previously, we saw Tom play, and he made a lot of good use of his Pheromosa to deal massive amounts of damage to his opponent Matt Carter's team, as well as being able to use the pressure from Fake Out on his Raichu and cycling some Intimidates to slow down the offensive presence of his opponent. So on the left, we have Leonard's team, which is Mimikyu, Torkoal, Mudsdale, Drampa, Hariyama, and Lucario. On the right, Tom's team featuring Arcanine, Tapu, Fini, Kartana, the Alolan form of Raichu, Snorlax, and Pheromosa. So Leonard running a very heavily Trick Room reliant team, and Tom having a much faster paced team. So Tom is definitely going to want to try and prevent Trick Room from coming up in order to maintain his pressure. Leonard, on the other hand, obviously, if he can take control of the game, set Trick Room, and just pick up KOs at his leisure, he'll be in a good spot. So Leonard does have a lot of options to help him set up Trick Room. He's got Fake Out on Hariyama, and Mimikyu, which can't be faked out itself, which is certainly helpful. Along with the Disguise ability, helping it set up Trick Room or Swords Dances if that's what he chooses to do instead. So we're jumping into turn 0 of game 1 as Tom decides to lead with Pheromosa and Snorlax. So this creates sort of a speed sandwich where Snorlax is extremely slow, is going to be able to function very well in Trick Room. Meanwhile, Pheromosa is extremely fast and functions very well outside of Trick Room. So it sort of puts him in a position where if Leonard sets Trick Room, he's still in a good spot, and if Leonard doesn't set Trick Room, he's also still in a good spot. So on Leonard's side of the field, we see this Mimikyu and we see Lucario. Lucario often carrying Final Gambit to work as sort of a suicide lead where it just goes, it takes itself out and it takes something with it to ease Mimikyu's chances of setting up Trick Room. However, Lucario could also be firing off a strong fighting type attack into the Snorlax, which would just completely prevent it from being able to do any damage that way, like if it fires off a strong close combat. Lucario does go for the Final Gambit into the Snorlax, but it's not enough to pick up the KO. So Lucario goes down without KOing the Snorlax, and so that's going to be huge for Tom. As Snorlax eats its berry, doesn't even care, and Pheromosa goes for U-turn, saying, hey, Trick Room's coming up, I don't want to be here for that. So that gives Tom the option to get his Pheromosa off the field, as well as breaking the Disguise of Mimikyu, which will be really crucial if he wants to be able to break that Mimikyu down eventually. Getting that first hit is always important. That way, when you hit it with a strong, powerful attack, you're able to deal a lot of damage to it. So Tapu Fini coming out, which will be able to pressure a lot of what Leonard has, and Snorlax going for the Curse, which is going to lower its speed. And seeing as Mimikyu is moving after Snorlax, we do know that Mimikyu is setting Trick Room. So that really sets Tom up in a good position with a Cursed Snorlax ready to go against whatever it is that Leonard brings in. Now, if if Leonard does have this Hariyama in the back, that'll be able to come in and deal a lot of damage to Snorlax. However, it's still going to be having to attack after the Snorlax, so Snorlax will get a chance to deal some damage. Instead, we see the Torkoal coming in, which I'm not entirely sure how speeds work. Sometimes Torkoal can be slower than a Cursed Snorlax. It definitely depends on how Tom has invested in the speed stat of his own Snorlax. And also what that's going to do is the Sun is going to weaken Tapu Fini's water-type attacks, meaning it's not going to be able to deal as much damage like with a Muddy Water or with a Scald into the Mimikyu. So Torkoal's definitely a strong Pokemon to have in here, and with Trick Room up, it's going to be able to deal a lot of damage. So Torkoal deciding to protect right now, figure out what it is that Tom's going to go for. Tom protecting his Tapu Fini as Snorlax goes for a Recycle. Definitely a play you always want to make to ensure that Snorlax stays healthy is to let it go for Recycles. That way, when you take damage, you can heal back up to full, and that really helps Snorlax to stay on the field for a long time, causing problems for your opponent. So what we see there is Snorlax hitting that Recycle. That way it's got some extra HP available when it gets hit, and Mimikyu going for a Swords Dance. So Mimikyu, to counteract the defense boost that Snorlax could be getting from the curses, going for a Swords Dance is going to be able to deal a lot more damage. So those two protects pretty inconsequential since no attacks were actually done, but the two support moves that the two players went to are going to be really key in these next couple of turns. So we see Snorlax go for the high horsepower into that Torkoal, dealing about 70% damage, and Torkoal going for a Flamethrower into Snorlax. So Snorlax takes that fairly well, eats up its berry to get back to about where it was before. Now we see the Mimikyu going for a Play Rough into Tapu Fini. However, Fini survives that attack and eats its Pinch Berry to get back up to around 75% health as it goes for a Soak into Mimikyu. So that's actually really interesting. That's going to do a couple of things in Tom's favor. One, it's going to remove the same type attack bonus from probably all of the attacks that Mimikyu has, and also it's going to make it a lot easier for Snorlax to hit the Mimikyu with a return rather than having to go for a high horsepower. So Snorlax will be able to hit this Mimikyu with its own same type attack bonus boosted attack rather than having to attack into it with the high horsepower. So we do see Mudsdale coming in that spot as Arcanine comes in to intimidate the Mudsdale. The Intimidate's not going to do a whole lot to that Torkoal, but getting the Intimidate down on Mudsdale is definitely something that's going to be important. It's going to slow down Mudsdale's attack output. As we see the return going into Mudsdale, dealing around 60% or so, as a Flamethrower does connect with Snorlax, bringing it down to about 40% HP remaining. Snorlax does not have a berry right now, so if Tom wants to heal back, he's going to have to go for a Recycle, and he might not want to do that in front of these two Pokemon, especially since he still has Trick Room active, and he can still take advantage of it with his Snorlax. So I'm not 100% sure. It's hard to tell based on, how the damage bars work. If another return into the Mudsdale will be enough to pick up the KO due to the fact that it did get a defense boost thanks to its ability Stamina. So we do see Arcanine going for Protect, and it's going for the Protect before either of Leonard's Pokemon can, meaning he didn't Protect here, as the return goes into the Mudsdale, and it is enough to pick up the KO, and so that's huge, as this Flamethrower goes into Snorlax, and likely takes Snorlax off the field. But I think Tom is probably okay with that trade. Snorlax has picked up 2 KOs for him already. Or not 2 KOs. Snorlax has picked up a KO for him already and also done a lot of damage to that Torkoal. So he's probably pretty okay with how that turn went. So now we know that Mimikyu will be coming back onto the field for Leonard. And Tom has the choice. He can bring in Pheromosa or Fini, and he does select to bring in the Pheromosa. So one advantage Tom has right now is that Arcanine will be able to fire off sun-boosted fire-type attacks into the Mimikyu slot, which are going to deal a lot of damage, and Pheromosa is just going to be able to deal a lot of damage because Pheromosa has a really high attack stat. We also found out in Tom's top 4 match against Matthew Carter that his Pheromosa is Focus Sash, so even if he mispredicts once and attacks into a Protect, he'll be able to take at least one hit. So that's an added level of comfort that he has in this current situation. So with that coming up, it does look like Leonard has decided he's got all the information he can get. He'd rather forfeit and go ahead and jump into the next battle. So now we're back in team preview for Game 2 of this final set. So what Tom is thinking right now is that Snorlax was really able to capitalize on Leonard's own Trick Room mode by setting that curse and being able to outslow everything on Leonard's side of the field. He was able to deal a lot of damage with that Snorlax. So Leonard's definitely going to want to look at ways to counteract Snorlax in this upcoming battle. Because setting Trick Room only to let Snorlax tear you up, probably not the greatest strategy. So that's definitely something he's looking at. He probably wants to play, if he uses Lucario, play it a little bit differently to make sure he can KO that Snorlax before it can start wreaking havoc to his team. So here we go, gonna jump into this turn 0 again. We'll see what these leads are and how this game is gonna shape up based on that. So Tom goes for the Tapu Fini and Arcanine leads, while Leonard goes with Leonard leads with Mimikyu and Hariyama. So Hariyama's going to be able to threaten the fake out pressure on either of these two Pokemon, but Tom does have the option of just dealing damage straight away. Arcanine does get an Intimidate off on Hariyama, which is going to lower its attack output, as well as the terrain being set by Tapu Fini is going to prevent the Flame Orb from activating for Hariyama, meaning Hariyama won't be able to take advantage of its Guts ability in the near future. It'll have to wait until terrain ends. So Leonard deciding he doesn't want to leave his Hariyama on the field to take a Moonblast, rather switch it out and see what he can do with his Mimikyu. So Tapu Fini goes for the Soak into what was the Hariyama slot, is now the Torkoal slot, and he goes for the Electrium Z move with Arcanine into that Torkoal, and so that's just going to delete Torkoal from the field with this Gigavolt Havoc, which is going to be a really big turn for Tom. So Leonard still has the option of setting Trick Room here, but he's losing one of his big Trick Room sweepers in the process. So yeah, we do see Mimikyu going for that Trick Room. And like I said, he did just lose one of his best Trick Room sweepers to a switch-in, but he does still have Hariyama. He could still have... Okay, so he's got Drampa as his fourth, which, with its massive special attack stat, is going to be able to deal a lot of damage to both of these Pokemon, as well as resisting the Fire-type and Electric-type attacks that Arcanine could be firing off. However, Arcanine could have Close Combat, which would be able to hit the Drampa for super effective damage as well. And Drampa, of course, is also threatened by the fact that Tapu Fini could fire off a Moonblast or a Dazzling Gleam, and just get some good super effective damage onto that. If he goes for a Dazzling Gleam, he can get the damage on the Drampa as well as Breaking Disguise, which is always something you want to do against Mimikyu. So the excuse me, Drampa going for a Hyper Voice, that's going to deal a lot of damage to this Tapu Fini, right around 50%, as Mimikyu goes for a Swords Dance, and we do see that the Mimikyu is slower than the Tapu Fini. So Mimikyu has been intimidated, meaning it's only at +1 attack now, and Tapu Fini went for the Soak into the Drampa, meaning it will lose the same type attack bonus that it had from its Hyper Voice, meaning it probably won't be able to KO Tapu Fini except on a critical hit here. And also Arcanine will be able to fire off a very powerful Wild Charge into that into the Drampa slot, being able to hit super effective damage onto it, which is definitely something, someplace he wants to be at. So Tom deciding that Fini has done its job so far, wants to get it off the field, switches in Snorlax, hoping to catch the Shadow Claw on that side of the field. Doesn't get it though, as Leonard double targets, as Leonard targets down the Arcanine, wanting to get rid of that. So we do see that Snorlax took like around 30% damage from that, less than that, around 25 or 20% damage from that Hyper Voice. So it's going to be sitting pretty well, being able to start cursing up to take advantage of these Trick Room turns, or just to get the extra defense in order to take attacks from the Hariyama that we know that Leonard has in the back. So Fini's back on the field. It's going to be able to take at least one Hyper Voice, but not a target from Drampa and Mimikyu both, which is definitely something Tom needs to be aware of. However, Leonard decides to switch out Drampa. He wants to reset the damage, or the Soak type change on it, as Snorlax goes for a Curse, raising its defenses, which are going to help it out a lot against the attacks from Mimikyu. I'm not sure if it's in range where +1 is going to be enough to survive an attack from Hariyama or not. And so Mimikyu is able to pick up the KO on the Tapu Fini, leaving Pheromosa as the last Pokemon, and Pheromosa does not want to be fighting in Trick Room, so that's definitely something that Leonard should capitalize on this turn before Trick Room runs out. Or if nothing else, he could reset Trick Room with his Mimikyu, whose disguise is still intact. So we do see Pheromosa go ahead and go for the Protect, not wanting to take any hits while under Trick Room. However, Leonard reveals Feint on Hariyama, which breaks Protect and allows Mimikyu to attack through that Protect and deal some damage to Pheromosa. So while Snorlax goes for another Curse, Mimikyu hits that Pheromosa with the Shadow Claw, which is able to pick up the KO. So now it's Snorlax versus 3. And Trick Room has ended, so Snorlax, while being at -2 speed, is normally beneficial for it in Trick Room. It will be unable to move first currently, and Leonard has no reason to set Trick Room again. Also, we see that the Misty Terrain ends, so Hariyama is finally able to get that burn from the Flame Orb it's been carrying in order to boost its attack just a little bit. So Mimikyu goes for another Swords Dance, really pushing the advantage because Leonard wants to be able to get enough attack power that he's able to KO through like all those attack boosts or all those defense boosts, and also being able to like ignore the recovery that Snorlax will be able to have from Recycle. So Snorlax picks up that KO on Drampa, and Hariyama comes back in. Hariyama has the Fake Out pressure again, could give Mimikyu a chance to go for another Swords Dance, or to just go on the offensive and get some damage down on it, because that could just be a free attack into the Snorlax. So we do see the fake out into Snorlax, and Mimikyu goes for yet another Swords Dance. That might be a little greedy, but it's not a bad plan to just max out your attack. That way you can deal the most damage you possibly can to the defense boosts on Snorlax. So we will see Hariyama is going to be able to fire off the close combat into Snorlax, and this Play Rough, which is at +5 right now, does connect, deals almost enough damage to Snorlax to pick up the KO, but not quite enough, who eats the berry and heals it all off. And so now this close combat does connect, does pick up the KO on Snorlax, and so that's going to force Game 3 in this finals match. So that was really well done by Leonard there. The Snorlax just wasn't able to capitalize on Trick Room as well as it could in the first game. And Mimikyu staying on the field certainly proved to be difficult because as it kept racking up boost while Tom was struggling to deal damage to the other Pokemon on Leonard's side of the field. It was able to get its attack boosted up really high in order to deal with Snorlax, even through the defense boost that Snorlax was acquiring through Curse. So once again, we're facing a Game 3 situation. Both players have had a chance to get a feel for their opponent, get as much information about their opponent's team as they can, and then figure out their game plan against that, given all the information they have available to them at the time. So Leonard definitely played around Tom's Snorlax very well that game. If Tom can position his Snorlax well again to prevent the Trick Room sweep from occurring, then he can be in a good position, and he'll have to figure out how to support the Snorlax to make that happen. So here we go, our last turn 0 of the night, as as Tom goes for Snorlax and Raichu, while Leonard goes for Mimikyu and Hariyama. So Raichu will be able to go for a fake out, preventing Hariyama from going for a fake out itself. However, if he does that and Leonard chooses not to go for the Trick Room, then he could be not in a, getting the curse up on Snorlax, lowering its speed, not necessarily the best place to be. So instead, we do see Drampa coming in here as Tom goes straight for the Shattered Psyche into what would have been, I imagine, into what would have been the Hariyama slot, and so Drampa is just going to eat that attack up. It'll still take decent damage because it's not resisted, but it's not going to do nearly as much to Drampa as it would have done to Hariyama. So we do see Drampa going down to just a sliver of health, and its ability Berserk activating, which does raise its special attack stat by 1 stage when it drops below 50%. And Snorlax does go for another curse, trying to set up these curses to help it weather a potential Trick Room sweep. So Mimikyu doesn't have any boost, Trick Room is not active, its Disguise is not broken, and on the other side of the field, Snorlax is at full health, has +1 attack and defense, and then Drampa is at very low HP with +1 special attack. So it's definitely in a position where it could deal some damage. As we see Arcanine coming in on Tom's side of the field, going to be able to intimidate that Mimikyu, which is going to slow down its attacking, maybe forcing it to boost a little bit before it can deal damage. And also, Arcanine will be able to threaten this Drampa slot with a KO, it's not going to take much to finish off the Drampa. And so that's definitely something Tom's looking to take advantage of. He doesn't want to have to take those +1 special attack hyper voices or whatever from Drampa. So yeah, he does target into the Drampa with the Flare Blitz, picks up the KO. As we see Mimikyu going for a Swords Dance. So Leonard definitely likes getting that Mimikyu boosted up in order to help it deal some extra damage. And so Snorlax goes for another Curse, bringing it up to +2 defense and +2 attack. And it's still at full health, meaning it's going to be able to take some hits from Tom's Pokemon very well. As we do see the Torkoal coming in here. So Torkoal is going to be ignoring the defense boost on Snorlax because it will be hitting with its special attacks instead. Meaning that the Snorlax is only going to be able to use its boost to help ward off the damage from Mimikyu, but Mimikyu is able to keep boosting its own attack to get around that. So we do see this Wild Charge going into the Torkoal, likely just trying to lower its HP enough that its eruptions don't deal quite as much damage. So we do see Eruption get fired off. It deals around 50% to each of the Pokemon on Tom's side of the field, as Snorlax goes for a Recycle, wanting to heal back the damage that it took and continue to be a bulky force on the field. So we do see Arcanine switching out, coming in for Tapu Fini, which is going to be able to take those Fire-type attacks from Torkoal quite a bit better. And we could see Tom trying to soak that Tapu Fini, or soak into the Mimikyu again in order to make it possible for Snorlax to hit into that slot without having to resort to high horsepower. And another thing that switch allows Tom to do is have Arcanine in the back to bring in to re-intimidate Leonard's Pokemon, which is definitely something he's going to want to be able to do when that Hariyama comes back in eventually. So we do see Tapu Fini going for the Protect right here, not wanting to take any damage, as Mimikyu goes for another Swords Dance. So the Flamethrower does connect with Snorlax, brings it down to about 40% while it eats its berry to get back to close to full health. And so now we see Snorlax go for the high horsepower into that Torkoal slot at +2 attack. That is going to be enough to pick up the KO onto that Torkoal, which is going to be huge. Because now Snorlax is at +2 defense, so it's going to be able to take the attack from Hariyama fairly well. However, it doesn't have a berry to heal the damage off right now, which means that if Leonard goes for the double into Snorlax, he'll be able to get a lot of damage that's going to stay on Snorlax right now. The problem with taking that route, though, is that Tapu Fini is still very threatening to the Hariyama, and just, going for a Dazzling Gleam to break the Sash. However, he goes for a Soak into Hariyama, which is going to take away the same type attack bonus from Hariyama on the fighting close combat, which could help Snorlax survive it just a little bit better. However, Snorlax is definitely in range for another Play Rough being enough to take it out. So if Tapu Fini goes for a soak into the Mimikyu to take away its same type attack bonus, that could definitely be something that is very beneficial. Because that would help the Snorlax survive the play rough from Mimikyu in order to require 2 attacks. However, he goes for the Heal Pulse into Snorlax. That's going to be massive because it means that Mimikyu will be unable to KO Snorlax with this play rough if that's what Mimikyu targets. However, Mimikyu does target the Tapu Fini instead. So that takes the Tapu Fini off the field as close combat goes into Snorlax. Only deals about 40% though, because of losing the same type attack bonus and Snorlax being at +2 defense. So that's definitely a really good turn for Tom, although maybe he wanted to go on the offensive there. Although now he did recycle back the berry, so he is sitting in a much better position to take these attacks. As Arcanine comes on the field and intimidates both of these physical attackers, that I believe that puts Mimikyu at +2 now. I think it has had 2 Swords Dances. So Mimikyu will still be able to deal some boosted damage, and Snorlax is going to be sitting very well taking these hits from these Pokemon. Arcanine does still have Wild Charge that it can fire off into that Hariyama, which will be super effective here. But it's not quite enough to pick up the KO. So that survival by Hariyama is going to be massive there because it's going to give him more chances to go for attacks into Snorlax. So Snorlax takes that close combat very comfortably. And then it goes ahead and eats its berry. As Snorlax goes for another curse, maybe figuring that the best way to play against this Mimikyu is to go for the long game. So we do see the mist disappear from the battle. That does mean Hariyama gets its burn thanks to its Flame Orb, meaning it's going to deal more damage with this next close combat than it did previously, but it will go down to the burn damage on this next turn. So now Snorlax is going to have to figure out a way to muscle through this Mimikyu while Mimikyu goes for another Swords Dance. So that's going to bring its attack up to +4, so it's going to be able to deal a lot of damage to Snorlax, despite Snorlax's defense boost. As Snorlax, comfortably takes that close combat and goes for a recycle, getting that berry ready to eat when Mimikyu attacks it. And we do see Hariyama going down to the burn damage. So now it's Snorlax versus Mimikyu. Snorlax does have high horsepower as a way to hit Mimikyu. It's going to need at least 2, possibly 3 attacks into Mimikyu in order to get the KO. Depending on if +3 high horsepower is enough to one-hit KO Mimikyu. So Leonard going for another Swords Dance there, hoping to catch maybe a recycle, when Tom anticipates taking damage and goes for a recycle. However, Tom doesn't play that game. He goes for yet another curse. So that's going to bring Snorlax up to +4 defense. It's going to be able to comfortably take most of Mimikyu's attacks, barring a critical hit. That's obviously something that Tom doesn't want to see coming out, and he will be able to deal a lot of damage with high horsepower into that Mimikyu slot. So it's just a matter of if he has enough bulk to take these play roughs, and if he has enough attack to deal enough damage to Mimikyu, who can outdamage who at this point. So Mimikyu goes for the play rough into the Snorlax, dealing around 50% damage, which is all healed back by the berry. And Snorlax just recycles that damage off. So Snorlax is going to be comfortable, able to take another hit, and still have a berry available to return. So one risk of playing this long game is the more times you get attacked, the more times you have a chance to have a critical hit or any of these other secondary effects of attacks occur. So we do see that attack drop happen on the Snorlax, which maybe isn't as important right now, because Snorlax is just trying to outlast this Mimikyu rather than to actually defeat it. But it's definitely something he'll need to keep in mind for this late game situation. As Mimikyu goes for another Play Rough, Snorlax is just continually eating these berries, able to heal off the damage, but the Play Roughs are doing about 50% to Snorlax, forcing it to continue recycling. So right now, Tom's play is to continue recycling, hope he doesn't get hit by a critical hit, and eventually wear down the power points that Mimikyu has available on the attack Play Rough. And so here, Tom does see that he's getting close to full HP, and so he does go for the curse to increase his defense by yet another stage. And so that's definitely a good play to make to help him more comfortably take these Play Roughs coming in from Mimikyu. And so we do see that that Play Rough didn't deal enough damage to activate the berry. He didn't have one at the time anyways, but that's all right. He's able to get the, get a berry back on the Snorlax, ready to take the next hit. And so we do see Play Rough connect again, and Snorlax is able to heal back the damage as it goes for another curse. So that is going to maximize Snorlax's defense, which means Mimikyu is not going to be able to deal more damage than it's already doing without a critical hit, which of course is always a risk. But in these long game situations, you do what you have to, and unfortunately, playing that risk is something that Tom has to do. Getting that miss is also another thing that, it's Play Rough only has 90% accuracy, so if you hit it 10 times, one of those 10 is probably going to miss and give your opponent a free turn. And again, that's just part of what happens in these long game scenarios. And it does look like that Play Rough connects is a critical hit and does give Leonard the win against the Snorlax. So well done to Leonard. Congratulations on your mid-season championship, mid-season showdown victory. And again, well played by both players. Leonard definitely saw this in-game with Snorlax is going to be long. I got to get my attack up. Without the attack boost, you get a critical hit, you don't deal enough damage for it to matter. So there, ignoring those defense drops, it is able to get the KO. Definitely a heartbreaking way to go on Tom's side. But when you're playing long games, the more chances you have for a critical hit to happen, the more likely it is to happen. And unfortunately, that's just the situation that Tom got himself into when he was playing a long game with Snorlax. So with that, once again, congratulations to Leonard, congratulations to Tom for second place, and thanks everybody for watching. I had a great time commentating, so I'm going to sign off now.